and I got a job working for a doctor in Liberty City, the black area of Miami, where they had a big race riot a couple of years before. And I drove in there with that little car and everything, and all the black people had a lot better cars than I had. They would just laugh at that, but it got across to them that this must be a pretty dedicated doctor because he obviously has no money. So sometimes it worked for me. And I saw a lot of nice patients. The patients were great. They were the nicest people you could want to take care of. And I worked in Liberty City for a number of months, I think maybe 5 or 6 months. And then I found an opening in an HMO office, health maintenance organization, mostly older people. Was really getting my hand back into the practice and learning, had gotten all my review of the drugs, my review of everything, at the same time really cramming everything new about emergency medicine at that time. And Vicky was really nice. They were getting along great with the kids. They were very encouraging. And while I was working for the HMO, I inquired about a job in Bonita Springs in a walk-in clinic, because you have to go from HMO. It's like an office type practice. A walk-in clinic, you saw more, you did suturing, and you saw, people with suffuse. You had emergencies that you might send to the emergency room. So I got a job working in a walk-in clinic in Bonita Springs, and I worked one week you'd work like 4 or 5 days, and the next week you'd only work a couple of days. That was very important, because one weekend I went to see the kids, and Vicky was there, and she said, you got this letter. A letter? I said, I got a letter. Nobody knows I live here. I said, well, in some way. She said, you got a letter. And I said, wow, it must have been when I was something with an ER there. So I opened it up, and it's Port St. Lucie, Florida, asking for, this is one of the biggest breaks I ever got in my life. I've been lucky, and I just continue to be lucky, because this was a huge break for me. At the time I read it, it said they need ER doctor there. It was an agency. So, being that I had time, because of that second week in the walk-in clinic, when the other guy worked most of the days, I was off a 4-day weekend. So I called the agency and said, hey, I could go over there and work a 4-day weekend there and pick up about $800 a day. So for 4 days, it was $3,200 for the weekend. So I said, man, I'm your guy. And then when I told them about my 4,000 hours, I got the job immediately. So I said, I haven't been doing any ER lately, and I sort of didn't go into details on that one. But I said, I work in Port Charlotte, so, well, I got a very good recommendation, I have a copy of that, from Sunbelt, from the emergency I worked for last. So I went to work at Port St. Lucie, and I liked it from the first time. The nurses were great. The 3 doctors were working there at the time, Robert Fink and Curtis Edward and Elliot Landfield. So my first weekend I was there, I had a serious automobile accident. And it was a very slow emergency room. They were just amazed that I got that. This elderly couple were hit by T-bone, by another car. The woman was sitting on the side she was killed. She was dead on arrival. And the man was seriously injured too. I did a good job taking care of the man, and he lived. And everybody was very complimentary, and as I was leaving the hospital that day, Curtis comes over to me. Curtis Edward, he was the head of the ER there, and said, the agency says they want to leave this emergency room, and they want us to take it over. You think we should do it? And I said, yeah, Curtis, do it. I said, you're cutting out the middleman. And this emergency room looks like it's going to grow. We're only seeing about 7,500 patients a year. When I left there, we were seeing 25,000. So, and I said, he said, we need a 4th doctor. I said, I'm your man. I said, I'll work here. I'm your guy. Because that's what I dreamed about. happening, but I couldn't believe that it was really happening. So, Bonita Springs was another story. I had gotten into trouble in Bonita Springs because they were using my name illegally. When I left the clinic, what they would do is, my name was out front, they would have the physician's assistants working without me supervising them. And this got back to, and I told them not to do that, but they sort of looked at me. The owner, the owner whose motto was, he used to answer the phone. This is the Bonita Springs Medical Clinic, the Can-Do Medical Clinic. He always answered the phone that way. Even if it was his wife, he would answer the phone that way. Anyway, so they said. So he said, Howard, with your problem, I think we're just going to do it. He didn't say anything about Howard with your problem. It meant, with your problem, with you being, because I think at this time at the medical board, I had already been placed on 5 years probation, and I had pretty much finished that first 5 years. So this was my second problem, but still at all, I thought that once the medical board finds out about this, they're gonna think I'm part of it, and that's the end. So what I did was I wrote a whole letter, took pictures of my name out there and with the time on it, on the picture that was taken, and I went up before the medical board, and even though they wanted to revoke my license, they didn't, but they put me on 5 more years of probation. And this is important because of what happened later at Port St. Lucie. So I left Bonita Springs and went to work full-time at Port St. Lucie. Before I got the job, I was interviewed by one of the doctors there, the head of the pathology department, very nice guy, Dr. Levitt. And I had my resume, but what I had done is I left out the fact of my first probation, because I felt that would impede me from getting the job, prevent me from getting the job, because they had already taken over the ER and it was permanent that they had it. So I started working with that, and then they checked with the medical board, of course, and found that I had a previous probation period. So Dr. Levin called me in and said, "We're really sorry, you lied to us, and we think that you shouldn't have this job." And I had to leave. And so I made up my mind I wasn't going to crack up over this, because it was a big disappointment. That was my great thing that I thought I was going to have, and I didn't have it. So I went back to the Armand, found a job in Naples, Florida, with a guy, a big fat guy who had this clinic there, and he didn't have a doctor. It was the season in Florida in the winter, and it's January, and he said, "Yeah, I want you to come with me." And I said, "Well, this isn't just for the season, is it? Because I would like to work for you longer." And he said, "Well, no, it's not just for the season." But I had a feeling it was going to be. But I saw patients for him, and he kept telling me what a good job I was doing. But when the season was over and it started slowing down, he told me I'd have to leave. So I left, and I got on the phone right away and called Curtis, because I figured I'd need a recommendation. I'd worked in the emergency because I was shooting for an ER job again. And I called Curtis. This was about 4 months after I had left there. And Curtis said, "I was wondering where you were." I said, "You're wondering where?" "Yeah, I've been trying to get in touch with you." I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, yeah. He says, the staff is reconsidering you leaving, and they want to come back. They want to talk to you again, because I told them that you're a good ER doctor and they want you to come back. Wow, I couldn't believe it. Lucky like crazy again. Went back there, talked to everybody. One of the things they asked me was, do you have plans of being the head of the emergency room here? Because they just took over the hospital. I said, I have no intention. I never want to be the head of the emergency room here. I always believed that you could influence people more by not being the head man. Being the head man, you can influence masses. But being the right-hand man, you could influence individuals. So that is what I did, and I got the job back again, and then I was really on my way. There were a lot of stories, but one in particular was one where I made this diagnosis of a dissecting aneurysm in the thoracic aorta, the big blood vessel in the chest. And it's funny, this is odd because I got into trouble for making this diagnosis. It was a very unusual diagnosis. All the guys were very proud of me. They thought it was really nice that I made this diagnosis. But the doctor who came in, who I called by the name of Aspie Doctor, he was Indian, Doctor, but we called him Aspie. And he came in, he was very mad at me. First of all, he had got a malpractice suit out of the emergency room. Not our emergency room, but in years before, when he was a doctor, he got a malpractice suit. So he was very upset about being called because he said, I don't operate on these kind. I am a vascular surgeon, but I do not operate on thoracic aortas. He has to be transferred to West Palm Beach. And so before this, I had sent the patient over to X-ray where they had to give him some intravenous stuff to show a contrast on his X-ray to show the dissecting aneurysm in the aorta. But they didn't replace the IV. So when he came out, we were running that day and that night, nobody noticed that his IV wasn't back in, and Dr. Aspie called my attention to it, went over saw that the IV wasn't in, and he said, how come the IV wasn't in? And he wrote a letter to the executive committee complaining that I, as an ER doctor, should have known that. And he was right. So I got called up before the executive committee, and luckily I had been there a number of years, and they saw the work that I could do. And so they said that I should, and I wrote them a letter saying that I should have definitely started the IV, and Dr. Aspie was absolutely right, and etc. But they were all noticed the fact that that was a very good diagnosis that I had made in the ER, and that helped me quite a bit, avoiding any trouble as far as that was concerned. Transferred the patient out. He did great. He was operated on. He did fine. And Dr. Aspie and I were cordial during the period thereafter. But one day, I had a patient with acute appendicitis, and Aspie was sitting at the desk there, and I noticed he was reading the chart, and I said, Dr. Aspie, I don't know whether you noticed or not, but he's had blood cells, red blood cells or blood in the urine, which sometimes can mean a kidney stone and not appendicitis. And he said, yeah, I saw that, Howard, but I'm not going to pay any attention to that. And then the nurses were all around, and as he stood up to leave, he said to them, when Adlerberg says it's acute appendicitis, it's acute appendicitis. And that sort of was a milestone for me, that I had really made great progress in my comeback as a doctor. So coming off the street, I had that one, what you'd call a relapse. But all those things could be looked upon like an inability to take responsibility and using bad judgment also, or anything, as Thomas Sass says, if a justification, an excuse in the form of a justification is a powerful argument. In other words, and the French also say, j'accuse, he who excuses, accuses. In other words, you accuse yourself of the very thing you're making the excuse for. So that's what I mean. So it's you have to look at things not in the of making an excuse. You can certainly cite circumstances that worked against you. In other words, the Bonita Springs was an example there of people deliberately trying to exploit me. That is not an excuse. That is a fact of something that happened. That's just one instance. But when you look at the other ones, when you look at Port Charlotte, and the article in the paper, and the fact that I had the trouble with my mother, and I didn't go to my mother's funeral, by the way, I don't know if I did not mention that. And I said I had worked really late, but I didn't want to go up there because I didn't feel like I wanted to be around my family at that time. And of course I was wrong about that. So that was a period that was filled with excuses, filled with lack of responsibility. And how did I wind up? Well, back into the institution again. So it's contemplating things in the institution with a drug-free brain, because they took me off, and being able to think clearly about it. I realized that if I was going to get where I wanted to go, to accomplish something in my life, my professional life certainly was remaining, and definitely in my family life, I would have to face the fact that I had a great habit of coercing people and not taking responsibility for my actions. And once I could do that, I would at least personally remove the stigma of mental illness from myself.